Okay, guys, I just got back after seeing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and y'all, I'm gonna be real with you. This is gonna be a no holds barred review. I'm not gonna make a separate video of this. I'm gonna have some spoilers in here. So if you guys do not want to know what's gonna happen in the movie, my suggestion to you is to not watch this or watch it after you see it. But because honestly, I'm not holding nothing back when it comes to this. So now that I pretty much have that disclaimer out there, here I go with my personal thoughts of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie. The music. Let's talk about the music. Oh my gosh, Juicy J and Shell Shocked. As soon as I heard that in credits, I'm like, I have to download this music because it is awesome. It really does get you hyped up after the movie. For those that don't know who Juicy J is, but know about Katy Perry's Dark Horse and the rapper at the end, that's Juicy J. And seriously, y'all, that's probably one of the best hits. I mean, seriously, like I bet the soundtrack's gonna be awesome, man. Seriously, straight up. And if they came out with a soundtrack, I would probably buy it, but I would probably have to hear all the songs first. But seriously, Shell Shock is one of my favorite. I have to download it. So for those that haven't downloaded it, download the music, look up Juicy J and Shell Shock and listen to it, and you'll be like, your head will be bopping. You'll be bopping for real. There are lots of talking points to talk about when it comes to this movie, and there's a lot of things that I have noticed that I'm not sure anyone else had noticed when I actually watched this movie. So I'm going to try to go over everything I could possibly remember, and then I'll go over the characters. Let's talk about the foreshadowing. It was ridiculous on how much green they actually used in the beginning of the entire movie. Good grief. There was green boats, green this, green that, green nails on April. For those that haven't noticed, there was a lot of green in the beginning of the whole thing. Sure, it was kind of teasing it. Hey, they're going to come. They're going to come. We know it. Just show them already. But let's move on to something else. The product placement. Good grief. We already know that Windows as well as Microsoft as well as Pizza Hut had to have a stake in it. Good grief. There was so much product placement when it came to Pizza Hut as well as the Windows Phone. I'm like, but it's typical. It's something you should get used to by now. And also, let's talk about the human element of it. The human element took way too long. Seriously, with the first 15 minutes, I was bored. I just want to see some turtles. Come on. We don't want to know much about April. We don't want to know much about Vern. And we all know how I'm going to get into the characters later. But honestly, we already know that when it comes to Michael Bay, we know that he is notorious of putting the human element inside of all of these movies. And it's ridiculous. It takes way too long. It's dragged out. It's ridiculous. And it's just to the point where you're absolutely bored. But before I get into all the bad, well, I pretty much got to most of the bad, but there are things that really did bother me, but I'm going to talk about some of the good things. Now, the good things were the turtles themselves. That was the one thing that a lot of people were kind of pissed off about because they were afraid that the turtles were going to be lame and not really stay true to their character. I will say that all the turtles were the best characters they could be. Mikey, of course, was the fan favorite. The guy was downright hilarious, but it made me sad that they made him a complete hornball. Good grief. My turtle shell's getting tighter. I mean, he didn't really say that verbatim, but regardless, it was sad. Oh my gosh, they made him such a hornball, but it made him quite a comedian because that's how he is on the Nickelodeon show. But then I'm like, good grief, the kids, are they getting this? Like seriously, are they getting any idea what Mikey's really saying? But besides Mikey, Raph was the man. He was the freaking man. I love Raph. Raph is pretty much my second favorite turtle right now. My first favorite was Leonardo. And yes, I had really big nerd beef, if that's a term, when it came to who voiced Leonardo. We all know that Johnny Knoxville, yes, the jackass guy, was the voice of Leonardo. So that was the one thing that bothered me. Because I was wondering if he was going to have a southern drawl or whatever. But honestly, you really couldn't tell it was him, and you kind of got used to it as time went on. So it wasn't too bad. And not only that, he played a really good Leonardo. So I can't hate on the guy for that reason. And yes, we have Splinter. Splinter, who actually, it was voiced by Tony Shalhoub. For those that don't know who Tony Shalhoub is, go back and watch Wings, and also go back and watch Monk. He was the lead guy in Monk. So for those that know who he is, you would have never thought that he would actually be playing a rat with a Fu Manchu. That's pretty much what Splinter was. And yeah, Splinter wasn't as fun-loving as he was in the beginning. Now, I guess that kind of bothered me a bit because I'm like, the guy in the first movie, and yes, it was a puppeteer, whatever. The Splinter in the first movie that I remember when the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie came out, Splinter was a very, very loving, doting father, but really well trained teacher. I mean, he trained his students really well, and he believed in his students really well. But what they did here was they actually made him more like a real dad. They made him like really scared to let his kids out on their own, as well as having him literally beat the ever loving crap out of them. Like if they did the one thing wrong, they would literally be tortured for information, which is one thing that kind of bothered me. But towards the very end, you can kind of tell that they actually made him more human-ish, except he was a rat. But they made him more like a dad that was afraid of letting his kids go, but understanding that they had to grow up sometime. So I can kind of let that go. Good grief. I always have a soft spot for a nerd. I love nerds. And Donatello was the main nerd. He was the lead nerd. He was an awesome nerd. He wasn't like a nerd just sitting there typing on his computer, coming up with some kind of logarithm. This guy was like a straight up hacker. You gotta love that. I loved everything about Donatello. I thought he was cool. Even though he was like straight up for real nerdy with the whole C Vertical laugh, he still was the prime time guy. Well, primetime nerd, actually. But it was kind of cool. But let's get on to the human characters. Good grief. Where do I begin? I have no idea who Whoopi Goldberg was supposed to play. I guess she was supposed to play that fat blonde guy that was supposed to be in the first Turtles cartoon in the 80s. That was really the one that kind of got on April's chops. Somehow Whoopi Goldberg probably paid somebody a lot of money to be in there, and she only had a few scenes. Her whole purpose there was just lame. She had no reason to be there at all. And let's get into Vernon Fenwick. Absolutely not the Vernon from the 80s, but he had way too many lines. There was no reason why he had to talk that long, and it was bad enough that Mikey was hitting on April at every turn to the point where he was practically doing her with his head. Well, with his mind. I'd rather say his mind, not his head. But anyway, he was practically sexually having sex with her with his eyes. And the same thing, but I guess Vernon was kind of like a coy version of that. Not, I guess, in somewhat of a way. He had a little bit of, he tried to be coy about it. While Mikey just was not. And as you can see, it did bother me for the fact that Mikey was a hornball. But let's move on from there. I did not like the fact that he had too many lines, but the main issue that a lot of nerds had was April O'Neil. You can't hate on Megan Fox. I will say this. Megan Fox kind of brought a little bit more life into April O'Neil. She's pretty much the closest of getting it right. Not completely, but the closest of getting it right. The first April absolutely had no personality whatsoever. The second April could not act at all. The third April, which is April O'Neil, Megan Fox or Fox O'Neil, she was okay. She wasn't that bad. She actually played a decent reporter. She acted like a real life reporter. Sure, her character was completely overbearing and nosy and wouldn't keep herself out of harm's way, and they kept trying to save her life. And I will get into the one thing that pissed me off later. But let's go into the main thing that a lot of people may or may not notice, or they probably have noticed. The one character that I forgot about was Sax. Sax was the most useless character of the entire movie. He was not a good villain at all. And I guess maybe I should save that for the villains, but either or, he pretty much goes into a huge plot hole that I'm going to actually talk about right now. Now, the plot holes was ridiculous. Oh my goodness. The fact that April O'Neil actually had all the evidence in front of her of the existence of the turtles, but she wasn't able to show her boss the footage. She only showed the footage of her taking care of the turtles when she actually was able to watch what the turtles did on her video. And she couldn't show her that. Not only that, she actually had a picture of the turtles jumping across the building, and she couldn't show her boss that or send that to her boss. She ended up showing that to Sax. Yeah. And the origin story, of course, was the biggest, huge, like, it had a lot of nerds' head exploded after they found out about the whole origin story. The origin story really was switched around. We do not know Shredder's name. He is an unknown villain. And not only that, there's no Orokusaki, and there's no, oh gosh, Hamato Yoshi. There's no Hamato Yoshi, and there's no Orokusaki in this movie at all. Which makes the battles between Splinter and the Shredder pointless. Absolutely pointless. Seriously, that was the main crux of the entire saga. And you're gonna leave that out? I'm doing my best to not nerd rage here, but it's just a point to where why did you take the main plot point of the story and then just change it into something completely different? Like, the whole purpose of this whole movie was to prevent leprosy from spreading all over New York. Yes, people, if you've seen what has happened to these people when they had the injection into that sample human guy and what happened to him, it's leprosy. That's what it is. He was spreading leprosy all over New York to become the savior with mutagen of unknown origin that has absolutely no facts of hidden powers at all. You're going to use a mutagen that we have not even seen done anything to anybody. All it has done was mutate some turtles as well as a rat, make them 8 feet tall and strong as all get out. No idea if it heals people or not. It just makes people mutants. So yeah, you're gonna use that to be the saving grace of New York? What? That makes no sense. Oh, good grief. And there were so many plot holes in this movie that it just made my head ache. It just made my head just want to explode. But honestly, there's an even bigger thing that there's something else that really got over a lot of people's heads. The oversaturation of 90s and early 2000s pop freaking culture. If you were 8 years old or 5 or 4, if you weren't 12, you would not get any idea what is going on in this movie at all. There were 4-year-olds that were in there talking and they were like, what is everybody laughing about? I'm confused. 6-year-olds were confused. 5-year-olds were confused. If you were below the age of 12, you're not going to get any of these references. 10-year-olds maybe, but if you're below the age of 6, you're not going to know. And I know I switched up the numbers a few times, but still, I can say maybe below the age of 8. Maybe. It depends on how strict your parents are. But seriously, the pop culture references are going to go over their head. Way over their head. From the fact that you saw a hollaback girl with the hot Harajuku girls, nobody's going to know what that is. Especially if they were born in 2000s. They're not going to know. And all this other pop culture references. And yes, there were a lot of them, especially Mortal Kombat. Shout out. There was a shout out to Mortal Kombat. If you guys probably didn't notice it, but in the subway scene, somebody actually shouts out, "Get over here." And for those that have actually played Mortal Kombat 9, there's a subway scene where there's a subway fatality. And let's just say that Raph kind of did the whole subway fatality without killing the guy. So yes, there was a lot of pop culture references hidden into this movie, as well as literally stealing actual scenes from different movies. Like for the hilltop scene, the scene that was on top of the building. The whole swinging up thing, one by one, that was done in Final Fantasy. That was done in Final Fantasy Advent Children for the last part of the movie. There were a lot of movies that were fused into this movie, and the one big plot hole was this, and I probably left that out. How can you fuse Vietnam with 19th century or 9th century feudalism? Like, seriously, how can you fuse in the feudal era in with Vietnam and somehow you guys meet and you have a sensei? That means that the sensei has to be at least hundreds of years old, probably close to 1,000 years old. That means that Shredder is probably like Doctor Who. He's probably close to 1,000 years old. Because if it was 9th century feudalism, 9th century feudal era, he has to be in the thousands of years, which means that guy has to be somewhat immortal. I don't necessarily get the whole idea. And they literally tried to fuse one thing and it just didn't work out. It just seriously didn't work out. And I'm going to go into the one thing that's going to really make me angry, that made me really upset towards the end of the movie, was the fact that this entire movie was geared around Megan Fox's character of April O'Neil. It was geared around her being the savior of the Turtles. That is what bothered me and boggled my freaking mind, for the fact that they actually had this little girl to be the savior of the Turtles as well as Splinter. Really? Not to mention the fact that she was the one with the killing blow on the Shredder. You couldn't even have the Turtles take out the Shredder. You had April O'Frickin' take out the Shredder. And yeah, you were the one that handed the mutagen to him, pretty much as a bowl. You pretty much took wrapped up in a bowl in your hands when you're supposed to take the mutagen off and show the people, hey, I'm right. You end up going on the rooftop with the mutagen in hand, pretty much handing it to the Shredder, and now Shredder has a bit of it for a sequel. Yeah, instead of actually taking it to the authorities or somebody that can believe you, you end up going to the rooftop and do absolutely nothing. In the very end, when Leo throws the katana into the Shredder, she ended up kicking it all the way in him, knocking him down. And somehow a shard of his own blade ended up being in his forehead. I don't know how that can happen. I really don't know how. But let's go into the major thing that pisses me off. That was one thing that pisses me off. But the major thing that pissed me off the most was Shredder. Shredder was freaking Megatron with Ginzu knives for hands. That's what he was. He was Megatron with Ginzu knives for hands. Is that the best you can do? Like, seriously, it's bad enough we don't even know the Shredder's name, and there's absolutely no feud between Oroku Saki and Hamato Yoshi. We ended up getting the Shredder in Megatron form, in Transformers form, with Ginzu knives for hands, an unbelievable amount of blades coming out of his hands every 5 seconds. And not to mention the fact that would Shredder honestly be going against a scheme to spread leprosy, to have one guy get the glory, knowing that he's the one that wants world domination? And why on earth was Shredder the only one speaking Japanese? Makes no sense. And not to mention that we don't even know if Eric Sachs was able to even speak Japanese, because the guy was just talking in English the whole time. How was he able to understand him? Oh yes, just well, sure, he's rich, he would know. We're making assumptions. They left that out. And not only that, poor Karai. For those that actually have seen the Nickelodeon series, we know that Karai is hardcore. That's a chick that will literally go far beyond the Call of Duty to take somebody out. She don't want anybody to help her. She didn't want Leo to help her. That chick can take anybody out by themselves. And she did nothing but stand behind the foot. What they did to these women in this movie really is pathetic at best. With the random roommate in there for some strange reason. No Irma, no Baxter Stockman, and no Casey Jones. But we did see some turtle babies. I will say the turtle babies was somewhat the highlight because these guys are cute. They were adorable as little babies, especially with, I think it was Donatello wearing some old underpants. I don't understand why, but it was cute. It was cute, but good gravy. It's, oh, wow. Give me a minute. I know I've been ranting a lot about how bad this movie is and how many plot holes is in there and how many things have really pissed me off, but I will say this. This is a movie that is a great movie starting off. Good grief, the CGI was amazing. The snow scene that got me dizzy at first, but did kind of got real fun towards the very end, was pretty cool. And there were some good points in the movie that I did laugh. Shoot, Mikey made me laugh at every time. And sure, there's mature language in there, but for crying out loud, it's to the point where I think people don't even care anymore. But besides all that, I will say that this was a fun movie, but with a really, 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 really very bad script. It was the CGI was really well done. The script was absolutely horrible. The actors had no idea how the characters were supposed to be. Megan Fox did the best she could with the April character, and I really will say that she did the best she could. There was no point even having Whoopi Goldberg in there. The whole feud thing was just completely gone between the two main characters of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles before the Turtles were even around. And there was so many historical problems, it was just ridiculous. But my overall thoughts is this, and I think I just said my overall thoughts. This is a good movie with a very bad script. That's pretty much it.